White Shame, Responsibilities and Moral Emotions by Daniel Haggerty. He talks about the difference between shame and guilt and how our society and whiteness tends to overemphasize guilt and underemphasize shame, and we need to strike for a balance between the two, and definitely need to value shame a little more. So shame is directly about the self. It's about worrying about disapproval. And shame is important because it motivates us to try and reconnect and work for forgiveness. With shame, we feel things more personally as an evaluation of our character. With guilt, it's not about the self, but about the act and its consequences. And guilt is about fearing being punished for our actions. With guilt, we desire to be blame or burden-free. With shame, we feel things much more personally as an evaluation of our character. Guilt is much narrower, and it's much more about the punishment. It's very impersonal. Overemphasizing shame shows deficiency in justice and failure to recognize others' rights, and overemphasizing guilt shows deficiencies in character and community. And we need to value community more, especially the Black community. We are tainted by things for which we also are not individually responsible for. For example, slavery and Jim Crow laws. Our generation is not directly responsible for it, but we should try, or we need to take responsibility for it in order to move forward. It's important for white Americans to understand whiteness, and we need to do our share of the work. We don't have to solve it, but it's important to recognize issues and not to ignore it, which is a lot of with what shame is about. We have to strive for a balance of shame and guilt, and shame is really important because it helps establish bonds. Justice Work and the Ghetto Poor by Tommie Shelby. He focuses on the Black urban poor because of their social position in the U.S., and they have the strongest reasons to refuse to cooperate with the new work regime. So joblessness includes both able-bodied adults who are unemployed but looking for work, and able-bodied adults who are unemployed but for reasons other than retirement have dropped out of the workforce. There's a difference between involuntary joblessness and voluntary joblessness. Involuntary joblessness are when jobs are just simply not available and so you're not working. And voluntary joblessness is when you choose not to work even when there are jobs available to you. And this is the kind of joblessness that angers most U.S. citizens. The new work regime says that there is a duty to work and a moral responsibility to work. A lot of the problem is with the definition of work. A lot of the time, the jobs that are available aren't considered work. For example, care work, like taking care of the elderly, family issues. And also enforcing a work ethic does not equate to human fulfillment. And also the time that is involved with work isn't really defined, like what's an adequate amount of work. There are 3 reasons or objections that the ghetto working poor have for not working, which Shelby believes are valid. And the first is the injustice objection. It's a form of political protest, and they feel they are burdened by the injustices of the social system, and so for that reason they don't need to work. And for example, things like slavery and Jim Crow segregation laws still affect Black life today, which is part of the injustice objection. The second objection is the exploitation objection. And under the current circumstances and work requirements, or the specific terms of work are exploitative and they impose discipline or not fear, that's the main purpose. It has dehumanizing effects. For example, you might have cheap labor where you're working extremely hard but getting paid next to nothing, or long hours, and that's seen as exploitative. The third objection is the expressive harm objection, which is that work demeans and stigmatizes the Black urban poor. relating back to their slave past, and believes that the new work regime would reinforce this stigma. So choosing not to work just to not reinforce the stigma of being of servitude previously by the institution of slavery. Overall, Shelby believes that there needs to be policies and fundamental changes in the basic structure of our society. The last article is What is Objectification by Lina Papadaki. Objectification is a notion central to contemporary feminist theories. There are three different individuals that we'll be talking about. First are McKinnon and Dworkin, who believe in the same thing, and they believe women can only be the victims of objectification, and objectification is seriously harming an individual's humanity. She is reduced to the status of a thing. She has no autonomy. Nussbaum sees things much broader than McKinnon and Dworkin. She sees things as seeing or treating a person as an object, treating one as an object, but it is still a human being. She doesn't necessarily believe that objectification has to be strictly negative or have any harmful consequences to a person's humanity. These are her 7 notions, and she says in order for someone to be objectified or seen as an object, it has to be in one or more of these 7 ways. She believes in negative objectification and benign or positive objectification. And in negative objectification, she is seeing and or treating a person as an object in such a way that this person's humanity is denied. Now, benign and positive objectification is when you are treating or seeing a person as an object, but their humanity is not exactly denied. Their humanity can be acknowledged or even promoted in benign and positive objectification. Now, Papadaki believes that there shouldn't be, or we should focus more on negative objectification and leave out Nussbaum's positive and benign objectification. And so her definition would be considered seeing or treating a person as an object in one or more of these 7 ways in such a way that denies this person's humanity. A person's humanity is denied when it is ignored or not properly acknowledged, or when it is in some way harmed. Now, I believe in most of what each author is saying. With Daniel Haggerty, I believe that we do need to strive to feel more shame. I think I'm just more unsure about how to represent that shame or express that shame in the most positive and influential way. With Shelby's article, I agree with the 3 objections, and I think they're very valid reasons for why the ghetto poor may not choose to work, and that there needs to be fundamental changes to our society. But I don't necessarily agree with choosing not to work as the best option. It also kind of seems that Shelby is giving a pass. I believe that you have to work your best to try and make your life better, maybe not for yourself, but for your future generation, alongside advocating for change. And with the last article with Papadaki, I agree that objectification hasn't been adequately defined and is kind of used vaguely. I tend to only think of objectification as referring to women as the objectified and referring to something that's sexual. But as Papadaki says, it's much more than that and needs to be worked on. And I think but we tend to focus on negative objectification because people don't really care to understand more about positive objectification. I think that overall all authors strive for understanding and trying to better our society as a whole.